Forget everything you learned in school about Columbus discovering America. Because 500 years before he ever set sail, a different kind of explorer, with a different kind of ship, had already landed on the shores of North America. This is the story of the Vikings and their legendary leader, Leif Erikson. A tale of courage, exploration, and a chapter of history that was almost lost to time. Our story begins around the year 1000 AD. The Viking Age is in full swing. These seafaring Northmen from Scandinavia have already left their mark across Europe, from the coasts of England to the rivers of Russia. But some Vikings pushed the boundaries even further, sailing west into the vast and known Atlantic. One of these was the infamous Eric the Red. Exiled from Iceland for manslaughter, he sailed west and discovered a massive island he cannily named Greenland, hoping to attract settlers. And it worked. Norse colonies were established, and it was here, in this harsh, beautiful landscape, that his son, Leif Erikson, grew up. Leif was his father's son, bold, ambitious, and with the salt of the sea in his blood. He wasn't content to just live in his father's shadow on Greenland. He'd heard tales from another Norseman, a merchant named Bjarni Herjolfsson. Years earlier, Bjarni was trying to sail from Iceland to Greenland, but was blown wildly off course by a storm. He sighted strange, new lands to the west, lands covered in forests, not ice. But Bjarni, in a hurry to reach his family in Greenland, never set foot on them. He just sailed on. These stories ignited Leif's imagination. While others might have dismissed them as sailors' tall tales, Leif saw an opportunity. He was a man of action. He went to Bjarni, bought his ship, a sturdy Viking there, built for cargo and long voyages, and assembled a crew of 35 hardy men. His plan was simple and daring: retrace Bjarni's route in reverse and explore those mysterious lands for himself. Eric the Red was initially supposed to lead the expedition, but according to the sagas, his horse stumbled on the way to the ship. He saw it as a bad omen and decided to stay behind, leaving Leif in sole command. So, around the year 1001, Leif Erikson and his crew set sail from Greenland, heading west into the unknown. Their ships, the Nares, were masterpieces of Viking engineering. Clinker-built with overlapping planks, a single large square sail, and a side-mounted steering oar, they were flexible, resilient, and perfectly suited for the treacherous North Atlantic. But even in the best ship, this journey was no small feat. They were navigating without modern compasses, using the sun, the stars, the flight of birds, and their intimate knowledge of ocean swells. They were at the mercy of the wind and the waves. The first land they sighted was a barren, rocky place covered in glaciers. There was no greenery, no sign of life. Leif, being a practical man, named it Helluland, which means land of flat stones. Historians today believe this was likely Baffin Island in modern-day Canada. It wasn't the paradise he was hoping for, but it was a start. They didn't linger. They pushed south. The next land they found was a significant improvement. It was flat and heavily wooded, with white sandy beaches stretching along the coast. The forests were a treasure trove. Greenland had very few trees, so timber was an incredibly valuable resource for building and fuel. Leif named this place Markland, or Land of Forests. This is widely believed to be the coast of Labrador. Again, they recorded what they saw and continued their journey south, the promise of even better lands pulling them forward. Finally, after more days at sea, they found it. A land that must have seemed like a paradise compared to the icy shores of Greenland. They sailed into a bay, then up a river that flowed from a lake. The climate was mild. The rivers were teeming with salmon, larger than any they had ever seen. The forests were dense with hardwood trees, and even better, they found something astonishing: wild grapes growing in abundance. For men who came from a land where grapes couldn't grow, this was a sign of incredible wealth and fertility. Leif was so impressed that he named this place Vinland, the land of wine. The name itself speaks volumes about how he felt about his discovery. It was a marketing masterstroke, much like his father's naming of Greenland. They decided to stay for the winter. They built a small settlement, a series of longhouses and workshops, a base camp for their exploration of this new world. They explored the surrounding area, gathering timber and grapes, marveling at the richness of the land. The sagas tell a specific story about the discovery of the grapes. One day, a German crew member named Tyrker went missing. The crew panicked, but he eventually returned, babbling excitedly in his native tongue. He had found grapevines and grapes, something he knew well from his youth in a wine-producing region. This confirmed the value of their discovery. It wasn't just a new land, it was a land of plenty. When spring arrived, Leif and his crew loaded their ship to the brim with timber and dried grapes and set sail back to Greenland. Their return was triumphant. Leif not only came back with proof of a new world but also with a cargo that made him a wealthy and respected man. He earned the nickname Leif the Lucky. His discovery sparked a series of further expeditions. His brother, Thorvald, led the next voyage. Thorvald and his crew used Leif's base camp in Vinland and had the first significant encounter with the indigenous people, whom the Norse called Skrallings. Unfortunately, this first contact turned violent. Thorvald was killed by an arrow, becoming the first European known to be buried in North American soil. Other expeditions followed, including one led by the merchant Thorfinn Karlsefni, which included women and livestock in a serious attempt to establish a permanent colony. They even had the first European child born in the Americas, though named Snorri. But these colonization attempts ultimately failed. Why? There were several reasons. First, the distance. Vinland was simply too far from Greenland and Iceland. Supply lines were stretched to the breaking point. A journey that took weeks or months across the dangerous North Atlantic was not sustainable for a small colony. Second, the native population. The Skrallings vastly outnumbered the Norse settlers and were not always friendly. The constant threat of conflict made permanent settlement incredibly dangerous. Unlike the later European colonists who arrived with overwhelming numbers and firepower, the small bands of Vikings were simply not able to establish a lasting foothold. So, after a few decades of attempts, the Vikings abandoned their North American settlements. The stories of Vinland, Markland, and Helgeland were passed down orally for generations before finally being written down into Icelandic sagas, the Saga of the Greenlanders and the Saga of Erik the Ray. For centuries, most historians considered these tales to be little more than heroic myths, epic folklore. A land of wild grapes in North America. It seemed too fantastical. That all changed in 1960. A Norwegian husband and wife team of explorers and archaeologists, Helge and Steiningsted, were determined to find physical proof. Following the detailed descriptions in the sagas, the coastal landmarks, the travel times, the descriptions of the land, they searched the coast of Newfoundland. At a place called Landsox Meadows, on the northern tip of the island, they made a world-changing discovery. They unearthed the remains of a Norse settlement. They found the foundations of turf-walled longhouses, identical to those in Greenland and Iceland. They found a forge for smithing iron, evidenced by slag and a stone anvil. They found artifacts like a bronze cloakpin, a bone needle, and a spindle whorl, proving not just the presence of Norsemen, but women as well. Carbon dating placed the site squarely in the year 1000 AD, right at the time of Leif Erikson. Landsox Meadows was undeniably a Norse camp. It was the physical proof that turned the Vinland sagas from myth into history. Today, Landsox Meadows is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a monument to this incredible chapter of human exploration. It proves that the Vikings, led by the visionary Leif Erikson, were the first Europeans to reach the Americas, nearly 500 years before Christopher Columbus. Their voyages didn't lead to permanent conquest, but they represent the absolute peak of Viking seamanship and their unquenchable thirst for discovery. It is a story that rewrites the history books and reminds us that there are always new worlds to discover, even in our own past. Thanks for watching this journey back in time. If you enjoyed this adventure, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the forgotten corners of history. See you next time.